Welcome to the Brisbane Property Podcast with your hosts, Melinda and Scott Jennison.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Brisbane Property Podcast. My name's Scott Jennison. I'm the Acquisitions Manager here at Streamline Property Buyers. And today we've got a special guest with us. We've got Tim Bennetton from Tim Bennetton Architects in Brisbane. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you very much, Scott. Lovely to be here.
Yes, we're super excited to be talking to Tim today. For the last 16 and a half years, he has been running his own architectural firm here in Brisbane, and we're going to be picking his brain on some of the latest trends that are emerging in that space, but also specifically to Queensland architecture or Brisbane architecture. You know, is it better to renovate or knock down and rebuild? We're going to answer some of these big questions today. So, Tim, when it all started for you, where did architecture begin?
Yeah, well, thanks, Melinda. I grew up in Melbourne and I actually studied engineering at Melbourne Uni. And then I worked for a while in an area which just didn't seem to be very creative. And I thought, it's a bit of a cliche, but architecture at its best is actually a combination of sort of art and science. So I thought I'd come up to Queensland, do that, go back down south, came up here, really enjoyed it. Decided to stay in sunny Brisbane and haven't regretted it.
It's an interesting background there, Tim, and I know we did talk briefly off air. You asked about my background as a builder, and I talked about being a buyer's agent now and the advantage and the plus that sort of has for our clients. I think the engineering background, that'd have to be a plus for an architect, because coming from that construction background, you would or the engineering side of it, you would understand how things have to be built, obviously, so then to design them. That would have been a real plus, I think, for an architect, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, Scott, because it means, like, you know, if you look at any project that you do, we sort of talk about with our clients as, you know, we start from a point which is basically unknown. Like, we want a house at the end. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know what it's going to cost. We haven't drawn anything. So it means you can sort of just tend to be more aware of some of the limitations with structure and footings and foundations. So anything that helps you get to a better end result with a happier client and managing those budgets is really important, I think.
And Tim, you worked with an internationally recognised architect for many years, Gabrielle Poole. Talk a little bit about that time.
Yeah, so when I finished studying at QT, we arranged a visit. This was must have been about 2000, I think. So we arranged a visit to go up and see some of his work. And one of, I guess, probably about the best house he ever did, in his opinion, would have been his Lake Wyver house with his wife Elizabeth at just behind Noosa. And I thought, wow, what a great guy, fantastic architecture, sort of simple, strong, down to earth. And so I hit him up for a job. There's also some good surf up that way, so I thought that was a great opportunity as well. And so he gave me, although I'd sort of just about finished architecture and I'd had graduated as an engineer, he gave me a student job for $250 a week. And that turned into about a 6 or 7 year experience working for him directly. And then we actually continued to collaborate on various jobs until he died about 2 or 3 years ago. So, you know, I think a lot of my architectural education was actually working for him and with him. It was really about how things feel. And I think the other really important part is just how we probably don't always appreciate how special a place we live in. In this part of the world, we live in between sort of Byron Bay and Noosa. You know, you need a roof. You don't really need that many walls, and you can get great opportunities to, I guess, get really closely connected to gardens and nature and things, which people from down south, which is where I grew up, you just don't appreciate how much we can do that up here. It's much less about strong enclosed walls and things. It's all about being, you know, almost living in the garden. So
big changes, Tim.
I guess that was the major lesson that he taught me.
Big changes when you've gone from an engineer down in Melbourne to an architect up Noosa way. I can see why you did it.
Yeah, that's right.
Good appeal. And I love the example you gave there of the different styles of architecture. And I know in the inquiry that we often get from Southerners, those that live in perhaps Sydney or Melbourne, when they're very used to brick and tile structures and, as you said, solid walls, and then they come up to Queensland and there's a lot of lightweight materials that may be used, and you would know more about this, but you referenced the fact that yes, a roof over their head is so important, but bringing the outside in, bringing that nature in, we do live in a much more I guess an indoor-outdoor environment. So there's a lot more opportunity for people to, appreciate the outdoors up here. So that obviously comes through in the architectural style that you do as well.
So
Tim, I think it's fantastic to be able to live like that.
I know we'll dive into a little bit more for our listeners. We'll dive into a bit more design and some ideas and pick your brain on how you do sort of those sort of things, as Melinda touched on, for the environment up here. Just give our listeners a little bit more of an understanding as well, because I know when people talk to us, if they want to look to build or renovate or whatever they might want to do, there's usually a question: do I get a draftsman? Do I get an architect? Can you just help people understand the difference when we start to talk between drafting and architectural side of things?
Yeah, for sure. So you're right. It is, and often when people embark on this, they often haven't done it before, and the whole building industry, I think, can be a bit intimidating for people. All they generally hear about is all the problems, how much it's going to take, cost, how long it's going to take, et cetera, et cetera. I think fundamentally, when you're looking to what you should do and how you might proceed, you've got to think about it as a different product. So if, for instance, you were to buy an existing house and it was all working pretty well for you, you didn't necessarily need to make it much bigger, and you had a very clear idea, either from your own experience or just the circumstances being pretty obvious, then you can go to a draftsman, and often you can go to a builder who will engage the draftsman, and they'll say, okay, well, we can make this, we can add on this room, a couple of bedrooms, and you sort of drive a lot of that as the owner. And a lot of, there's a lot of builders who have an interest in design, and so you'll have a discussion about, well, how big might it be, where might the windows and doors go, and so that's one option. The other option is if you've got something either a lot more complex in terms of what you want to add to it, or you're doing a new house which looks quite complex and it's in perhaps the site's a bit difficult, then that's often the case where you want to get an architect to do it. And the architectural product, what I'd say to people is, if you're thinking of using an architect, then you should research both what that architect produces in terms of how it looks and feels. And if that looks good, then you want to have a chat to them and see if you can work with them, because usually it takes, a period of about sort of 2 years by the time you start to by the time you're finished. And different architects will work in different ways. The way we work is we do a lot of upfront work to understand our clients, to understand the site, and then for us to get the best quality product in our minds, we stay involved through the whole of the construction period. So, if you're someone who's overseas, for instance, and you can't attend to all that stuff yourself, or you're too busy, or you don't have the expertise, then that three-way collaboration between architect, client, and builder through the whole process is really good. So that's I guess that's the two real differences. It is a difference in product, and it's a different in complexity. Yeah. I think what I like to think about architects who do a good job is that we the maximum, that's where the design skills which architects have, that's where you really get the benefit of it. So it's really to maximise the views, and for us it's cross ventilation, all that type of thing, and really the connections to landscape. And I don't think there's any other profession that's any better place to do that. A great builder you need to work with, because you want good quality, you want to stay up, you want all that, and you don't want the hassles of people mismanaging how a project gets built. But to maximise the opportunity for a complex site or a complex brief, then I reckon an architect's essential.
Before you start designing a home, Tim, there's a process that you ask all of your clients to go through. And I've been lucky enough to experience the process already myself. What is that process that you go through to help understand or help your team understand what people want in their home?
Yeah, thanks, Melinda. That is a good question. I think that, again, that probably goes a little bit back to the previous one. We spend a lot of time up front trying to deeply understand our clients as best we can. So if you think about any design project, you've basically got a site, and that site will have certain requirements, bushfire, whatever, some practical sort of considerations. And then you'll have what the client wants. And so we've got a two-step process. One is we get them to do, we ask them to do some surveys, some electronic surveys for us, which cover a range of things from the practical requirements as best they understand it at the time. So, well, I need to cater for my elderly parents, so I need an extra wing, I need 3 bedrooms, I need a kitchen. So it's kind of like a practical list of things to be included. And that's, I guess, the traditional idea of what's called a brief to go to an architect. And from that, you can look at sizes and you can generate a plan, and you can then, once it's, how big that is, you can get an estimate of costs. But the other thing that we do that we find is just as important is we have a 2 or 3 hour workshop that we do with our clients, and we have a series of exercises which includes some drawing for a couple of exercises, which some people get a bit intimidated by, but it actually opens up a different part of their brains. And what we're trying to really understand then is what makes them tick as people. So we've done quite a lot of those, and we'll find that some people, for instance, and I'm using a kind of an oversimplification here, but some people go, well, I really love being up high and view is all important to me. So potential find an obvious one, but we get other people who go, well, actually, I don't care so much about being up high. I actually want to be really connected to the earth because, and you do get a different experience. So, we're talking in Queensland, the traditional Queenslander is a sort of suspended structure above the earth. I live in one, I love them, but you've got to disconnect from the garden, whereas a courtyard type house, which we're doing a lot more of now in Queensland, where you can basically walk out of the doors into the garden, it's a different feel. So one way to ask people about a brief is, well, do you like to be up high? Do you like to be down low? What we want to do with our workshops is actually tap into how they grew up and some of their experiences to not ask for sort of a simple answer. We like to sort of tap into it and explore it in a fair bit of detail. And often we'll find, if it's a couple that we're working for, which is pretty usual, each member of that partnership might have completely different views on how they want to live. So we're doing a house at the moment in Budrum, and the wife has said, well, I like to sleep in. I want a complete block out in my room. I mean, it's an amazing site, looks out to Moreton Island. And the husband said, I don't care about privacy. I get up at dawn. I want to basically have a completely transparent bedroom. So you can see that's where if you were to go to perhaps a draftsman and go, well, I want a bedroom that I can be completely locked down, block out the light, and completely transparent. It's like, well, how does that work? And that's where the joy and the challenge of design to get these things to work comes through. So in summary, Melinda, we do some upfront lists, technical stuff, desires, and then we do a kind of a deep dive into what makes people tick. And where we can, we really like to respond to those sort of gems of information that we get out of people.
It's interesting that you say that you really take a deep dive into understanding what makes people tick, because I can't imagine there's anything more important than living in a home that makes you feel a certain way. And I know when we represent buyers as buyers agents, we need to understand how people feel in a home, because objectively you can turn up and you can show a couple a home that has the desired number of bedrooms, the right layout, the required living space, the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, ensuite, everything that they need. But if it doesn't feel right, then it's not going to be the perfect match for them. And like you, quite often we will have husband and wife couples who have quite different ideas when it comes to ideal living. So when you're buying an established home, it's obviously very hard to satisfy everybody's idealisms when it comes to perfect design. But when you're creating your own home and you're working with an architect like yourself, obviously that is something where you're able to draw out what is important to people and include that within the design so that everybody gets something that they're wanting.
Yeah, I think that's right, Melinda. It's a good summary. And, it's a way to, as you say, when people are buying something, I guess they can look at it and they might imagine how it might be furnished, or they might imagine some alterations, but it's a bit more difficult for people. But it's a pretty expensive mistake, or it can cost a lot of money to rectify. So all that upfront work is really important to, again, get to the other end and be happy with what you've got. And that journey takes a fair bit of time. And I had another important thought then. It's just gone straight out of my head.
Tim, I've been involved in the building industry pretty much all my life. I was a carpenter with my dad, so I've seen a lot of changes through construction side of things. What can you give us an understanding? What sort of things have you seen change a lot when it comes to designing homes, especially up here in Queensland? And what sort of things? I mean, one thing I'll probably reflect on really quickly, whether I'm right or wrong here, you'll probably correct me. What sort of things have lasted the test of time? So I remember years and years ago, we used to have louver windows. They then decided to put sliders in and double hung windows and all that sort of thing. All of a sudden, louver windows come back in because they let the breeze work really well when they go through properties up here in Queensland. What sort of things have you seen change, and big changes, and what sort of things have you seen really stand the test of time and come back?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the big change that I've probably seen since I graduated is I think there's a real tendency now to build a lot more. So houses tend to be a lot bigger.
Yep.
And then I've seen certain fads come and go. Like 10 years ago, everyone wanted to have a home theatre, and now I think everyone's realised that's a big waste of space.
Yep.
So, and the big one at the moment is butlers' pantries. People sort of like that. So there's some of the fads that come and go, and I guess there's a certain media out there, and people see things on TV and they go, well, that's the latest, that's what I want. I think the other really big change is we've got, and there's some architects in Brisbane that probably drove this over a number of years, with construction techniques being able to accommodate sloping sites better than, say, the old Queenslander did. I think we've really understood a lot more about how we can get those connections to the earth, and, like, as you sort of say, big sliding door systems and screens which can retract to the full width. You're not just left with a tiny little sliding door screen. So those, I think that's a big shift, and I can't see that ever going back, because I guess it's a reflection of how we want to live. And I think that connection to garden and outdoors is not something which we're ever going to suddenly go,
Yeah.
Let's move inside again. I suppose potentially, if the climate does heat up and energy costs increase, there could be, maybe that gets adjusted a little bit. But I do think we understand now how to live a bit more in harmony with our environment, even though we're doing houses which are probably bigger than they should be to some degree.
Yeah.
So I think that part's definitely stood the test of time. There's definitely a few different construction techniques out. There's a fair bit more heavyweight architecture happening, concrete, but it's not used in the sort of old brick veneer suburb type way. It's used where you sort of you might see the off form finish of the concrete, that type of thing. And yeah, I think louvers are back. They do give you a great benefit with cross ventilation, and I suppose just maximising openings where you can, either for view or connection to the outdoors.
Yeah.
That's something which has been important. We're able now to do with sort of steel and things. We're able to get bigger spans, to get bigger openings. So that has changed, and that'll, as long as we can keep doing it, we'll keep doing it.
Tim, one of the things that we often get asked when people are looking to buy is, should I renovate or should I knock down and rebuild? Now, obviously, in Brisbane, there's some limitations when it comes to knocking down character protected homes, or, there's demolition controls in some locations. But what is the best way to approach that? And I'm sure you've got a unique perspective on, that question. Should I actually renovate this home or should I knock it down and start again? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I reckon it. Thanks, Melinda. I think that's another excellent question. We get asked it. We get asked it a lot. We particularly get asked it in relation to some of the older Queenslander timber houses in Brisbane. Mm-hmm. And I think, like a lot of things, there's probably two aspects to it. One is a numbers sort of analysis. So in round terms, an old Queenslander, let's say it's 150 square metres in size. Now, a lot of your listeners won't necessarily they might have talked about houses being in squares or some other size, but in Queensland, we talk about the square meterage being in square metres. So, a small 2 to 3 bedroom Queenslander might be 150 square metres. At the moment, with construction costs, you're probably needing to think about $4,000 to $6,000 a square metre for construction. So if you think about demolishing an existing house, let's say it's 150 square metres in size, you might pay 30 grand to demolish it, and then you've got to rebuild that 150 square metres in some form. And if we said it's, $4,000 a square metre to rebuild it, that's $600,000. So, that gives you $630,000 to look at that existing house and go, well, how might I get a better use of my money? And that's really what we look at is, okay, well, how good is that existing house? How sound is it? And how much work would we need to do to get the benefits out of that site? Because it's usually, as we said, if you're going to use an architect, it's all about how to maximise the opportunities. So we go, what do we need to do to that house? What could we get for $630,000? And if we only need to spend $200,000 to get a huge amount of benefit, then that's what we would look at doing. And then often there's an extension component as well. So that's the sort of the numbers part of it. I think the other part of it, and it's a bit harder for people that haven't lived in a house for a while, if you're someone who, if you bought the house, you've lived in it for a year, you've been through the seasons, and you kind of get a feel, often I'm sure you guys have found this, often what you first think about a house is slightly different. If you've lived there for a year, you kind of get to know it. You get to know where the sun comes up in the winter, or whether the breezes come through, or there's a sort of that piece of garden that didn't look too special at the start, actually you really like it. So the other part of it is, how special does that house feel to you? And for instance, if you've got something that's sort of small and dark, and all the rooms are small and the ceiling's low, and you can't open it up, you might save money, but you sort of go, well, I've put $300,000 in. Yes, I saved money, but I haven't ended up with anything particularly special. And I do think whatever you do, if you're embarking on a project, any sort of renovation, to be honest, renovation of a new house, you want to give yourself the maximum chance at the end of going, wow, we've really created something here which is good for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And we really have maximised the opportunities for that site and how we want to live on that site. So it does come down, partly it's a financial analysis and how sound it all is and whether there's things to rectify. And the other part of it is, what do we need to, how are we going to feel? Again, it comes down to the feeling. Can we make this feel special? Or are we going to spend all this dough and it's kind of going to be a bit average? So let's knock it down and start again.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Tim, when you talk about living in a property, and we talk to people about this when they buy a house and think about doing some work or renovations. And well, generally the first thing we'll say to them is just live in it for a little while and experience it and get a feel of it. And then you really understand things like, as you say, where the sun pops up, where the breeze comes from, all those types of things. And you really get a feel of how that house works. I want to ask on, and I know you touched a little bit this on when you talked about the windows and the open spaces and louvers and things like that. Environmental side of things, I know that the energy efficiency side of houses is really big. I personally think it's probably going to get bigger. You'll probably be able to shed a bit more light than that. I think there'll be a lot of more importance put on that with, as you say, the cost of living, which you touched on as well. What sort of things are you seeing that are becoming really important? Because I think for the general listener that doesn't know a lot about building, the first thing they'll probably do is talk about solar panels on the roof. There's a lot more to that, obviously, than when you come to design a home from the architectural side of it. What sort of things are you seeing in the environmental space?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you say, it's only going to get more important for a couple of reasons. One is I guess there is a consensus that the planet's warming, and we need to be really conscious of how carbon intensive products and running of houses are. So there's that, and then there's also just the sheer cost of living. You know, the amount that bills add up to at the moment. So overall, it goes under the term, I suppose, sustainability, which can be become a little bit of a meaningless term for some people. But what we mean when we talk about it, and it is a big focus of our practice, it means everything from doing things smaller but remaining generous. So we'll often advocate to our clients, let's make this no bigger than it needs to be. Let's build less. It'll cost, it doesn't take long if you're averaging 4,000 a metre to save quite a bit of money on construction costs by making it smaller without compromising actually the feel at the end. That's where the real skill lies. And then it runs down, it cascades down through all the other decisions made about the building. So we will always, at the early planning stages, look to maximise what they call passive design principles. So if we can get rooms that are open on both sides, or we'll open up a corner to get breezes through, it doesn't mean that you would have no air conditioning, but we'd like to think instead of running that air conditioning 6 months a year, we'd get it down to a month a year because it's designed properly. And maybe instead of having a massive system, you can end up with a slightly smaller system because of the ability to get that cross ventilation through. Heating is a bit less of an issue in Brisbane, but I actually find the winters surprisingly cold. So trying to get
that's because you've been in Brisbane for a while now.
Yeah, that's right. And the old Queenslanders don't have good insulation, which is the other big thing. Right? That doesn't cost much. So again, through the construction process, ventilation, getting lots of insulation, which is really cheap to put in, but makes a massive difference in terms of running costs. That's essential. And then, where you can, getting your own power in terms of solar panels is a really good thing to do. You might have to edit this out of the final clip, but when I did engineering, we had a lecturer who did a lot of work in Papua New Guinea and places, and he said to all the engineers, much more, what do we climate or the how hot the place is, or the culture or the diets and things like that. And he said the single most important thing is how easy it is to access water. So if you've got a whole lot of taps in your house, you use 1,000 litres a day. If you've got one tap in the garden, you use 100 litres a day. If you've got to walk 5Ks to a tap, you'll use 20 litres a day. And so one of the things I love about sustainability, and we've done off-grid houses and things like that, is you really get aware of what you're using. So if your battery's going down, you go, well, I'll actually turn those lights off, or I won't run the washing machine till tomorrow. So I think it's really good from a cost point of view, aware of what we're using, because it's I probably sound like a bit of an energy nerd, but it's actually quite, I prefer to see how much water I'm using and have a generous shower than where their resources is, I think, a really good thing.
If people want to get in touch, Tim, I know that we haven't had a lot of time to cover all of the information that we would have loved to have covered today. But if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
I think the best way is just to go to our website. So my name's got lots of N's and T's in it. Perhaps we can put up something as
put it in the show notes.
Type that out. Yep. That's probably the best as an inquiry page there. Happy to take a call or receive an email from people at any time. We are pretty passionate about doing the best design we can and getting the happiest clients we can at the end. And we really do like that sort of residential domestic space where you really get to know your clients over that period of a year or two, and it's a sort of a shared joy when you've completed a project together. It's fantastic.
And just to help some of the listeners, if they are looking for an architect, what is the main type of design that you would focus on so that the right type of people would be reaching out to you?
I think what you're best to do, it goes a little bit back to what we said at the start. You've got to choose between builder, draftsman and architect. And then if you have determined that what you want is an architectural product, just about all architects now will have a website which will showcase some of their work.
Yep.
So that'll tell you the type of product that they do. I would definitely say to people, if you can, try and visit one or two of the properties that they've done. Usually we find our new clients have walked through an old client's house, or we've taken them for a visit after some conversations look like it's going to be a good fit. Because I think, as you said, Melinda, there's all the pictures, there's all the photos, but it actually comes down to the feel of it. And you get a feel for what someone does and how they work when you visit an old project. So that's what I'd try and do.
I liked, Tim, I think maybe our boys need to get a tip off you when you said be aware of what you use, because the amount of water they use and the power they use drives us mad sometimes. and when we do sit down and actually show them what it costs, I think it's a bit of a shock. But I think if you had that actually displayed somewhere.
You just want that visual. Like, if you had in your shower, you got a visual going, mate, you got 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Or you got 20 litres.
Yeah.
I often joke I'm going to go out and I'm going to blow the gas out so that their hot shower turns cold and that's the end of their shower. But
Exactly.
Look, Tim, it's been great chatting. Look, I think there's a lot of information there for people, some good tips and some great ideas. And as Melinda said, if people do need help or interested in having a chat, reach out to Tim Bennetton Architects here in Brisbane. I've seen some of your designs and they're quite amazing. So, mate, thanks very much for having a chat. I will let Melinda wrap it up as we normally do and close it out. Until next week, thanks very much for listening and bye for now.
Yes, thank you so much, Tim. We have really appreciated you coming on to our show today.
Thank you very much, Melinda. Thank you, Scott. It's been a real pleasure to chat.
Wonderful. Well, look, if you've enjoyed this episode, as always, please don't forget to share this episode with friends and family, especially those that may be looking to renovate or rebuild or build from scratch here in Brisbane or indeed in Southeast Queensland. Tim Bennetton might be the next person that you are speaking to. If you've enjoyed this episode, also, please don't forget to leave us a review on your favourite podcast player and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any future episodes. Until next week, we hope you have a good one and we'll speak to you again soon. Bye for now.